welcome to today's seminar. Alright, so we will have the opening prayer from Miss Luca. Please, Miss Luca, come and give us the opening prayer.
Please shall we pray. Lord and Master Jesus, we thank you for this morning. Commit our program to your hands. We pray that Father, let everything that we do here be successful. For the glory of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. We have as our chairman today an architect. Some of you don't often see around. He went on leave, but he has resumed. He has resumed. Yes. I reminded him about this when he landed in the auditorium. He's a senior research scientist, and he's a pest provider. So, those of you who don't know, he attended St. Peter's SHS, but St. Peter's Secondary School in Kwadwo, and they call themselves pest provider. And so, Chairman, today you have plenty people as your audience. Audience and Chairman, shall we please applaud him as we welcome him to take over?
This morning we have two important topics to discuss, and they are very important for the built environment. One is what we see in the physical and built environment. The other one is belief, something that sometimes we tend to neglect. In fact, all of the issues that we're talking about are things that are subtle but very important, and often, more often than not, we decide to either disregard it intentionally or ignorantly. So I believe today, this morning, particularly, we're going to learn a lot on the issue that we raised, and it's also going to lead us in the institute in the way forward. The first one that we'll be presenting is the head of mission of the built environment. He's an architect, senior research scientist, now a PhD candidate, and he's married. And this is a person with high pedigree. We therefore invite architect Kwadwo Ampofo to give us the first presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman, for giving me the opportunity to present on heritage impact assessment, a useful tool for preservation and management of ancestral heritage in Ghana. By way of content, the presentation will take the form of introduction, the program statement, aims and objectives. The heritage, ancestral heritage we have in Ghana, methods and approaches, findings and conclusions. Epochs, which is eras in generations, have its own architecture, have its own artifacts which are very valuable to that epoch, and it's very important to preserve such heritage or architecture which was built within the generations. We don't say we are in the modern world, so the classical world is outdated. We need to leave them and then teach the posterity about what used to be in place. We talk about cultural heritage, and you can't leave out UNESCO, which brought out the convention, which countries have signed on to, which will mandate them to preserve the cultural heritage within their countries. And when we talk about cultural heritage, it's about monuments, group of buildings, sites, which have historical, aesthetical, and other values, which include buildings. And that is the area I've sought to carve out in the cultural heritage. Is quite broad. And the architectural heritage aspect is what we are dealing with now. And as, again, as I said, there are a group of countries which Ghana is part. From 1975, Ghana was the first sub-Saharan African to sign on to the UNESCO convention, which was agreed in 1972. And then, again, Ghana started with the preservation of architectural heritage with the formation of ICOMOS, which is International Communities for Monuments and Sites. So the country has started something way back just after independence. And architectural heritage or cultural heritage, wherever it's found, see land values increase. In Italy, Canada, UK, you find wherever there is a preservation of cultural heritage, that area has a high land value, which makes it very important for us to look into as a country. And the main problem for this research has to do with the easy demolition of architectural heritage in Ghana. When I talk about easy demolition, we find it around. When the city or the area is getting developed, we easily break off an old building and develop a new one. Whether it has a historic value, aesthetic value, whatever, we don't care. And this call for the Chief Heritage Officer of UNESCO, last in Ghana, in one of the workshops, stating clearly that there is the urgency for the country to domesticate that 1972 World Heritage Convention that we signed on to, which is mandating us as a country to protect our historic buildings. And he further claimed that if we don't do that, Ghana may be deleted from the state parties of UNESCO, which is very serious. For this study, I'm looking at preservation and management of architectural heritage versus development planning within our built environment. And it's clear in literature, Mobila, Fredon, and then UNESCO all bring out the lack of protection of our architectural heritage, management programs, and legislative laws. And this is the main part of the study. The question here is, why has it become easy to demolish historic buildings in Ghana? And notable amongst them is the Twumasi Palace, which was built for Prime Minister I after his return from exile in Seychelles in 1926. You go to Edum now, and this building is now the Melcom. You go to the northern region, and all the traditional architecture, which has a lot of benefit in terms of their climate, the heat system, the roof material, the shape of their buildings is circular because it's supposed to radiate the intensive heat from getting into the indoor environment. We see it being changed. You see the aluzinc sheets, rectangular shapes, which is not good enough for the climate. But now, as we move along the northern region, all the circular buildings and then the mud buildings are giving way without thinking about its benefit and its historic importance to the region. Down here, you find Fort Fredericksburg in Old Mingo. On a visit to the World Heritage Site, I chanced upon it nearly demolished. I had to call a few people for them to leave this ruins there for them. They did not really see the importance of it. There was a contractor who was working on the sea defense at Old Mingo, and they were just demolishing the whole thing. Again, we find a lot of buildings. This here, 1701, Magic Cola Tree, which is found at Fiyasi, you go there now, it's there. It was nearly demolished during the construction of the Lake Road. And again, it took our intervention to preserve it as it is now, and we are still working on it to make a monument out of it. But the history, they claimed that Ampofo spit out cola that he was chewing, and the next morning the thing sprout out and it's still there. The main aim is to assess laws to enforce the integration of preservation and management of architectural heritage in the development planning of Ghana. Thank you. What do we have to preserve as a country? I looked into our architectural heritage and I can classify it into three groups: the pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial heritage that we have in our architectural heritage. This is the Bisianse Ashanti traditional building, which has stood there from the 17th century to date. These are the northern architecture, Islamic architecture here found in Gulugu. It's still there. This was in the 16th century when the Islamic insurgents was invoked in the northern region. Here we have the colonial buildings. This is the site where the bond of 1844 was signed in Ghana to abolish the use of human being as part of sacrifices. These are all part of the colonial buildings. You see the People's Castle, the Ramsey Presby Church at Edum, and then the railway station, newly refurbished in Tapradi. These are post-colonial buildings, and I'm looking at 10 years after the independence, when Kwadwo used modern architecture to unify the country. He did not want to enter into any tribe which would skew the unity of the country. So he sought to go modern way to unify the entire country, including the Independence Act. And we have a lot more to preserve as a country. The study is more qualitative, reviewing literature and then the laws that we have. And again, I looked at some approaches, main approaches, and we have two main approaches to preservation and management of architectural heritage, which the first one, the minimalist, started by the French architect Emmanuel Leduc in the 1814 to 1879. He restored a number of cathedrals after the French Revolution, and to him, he started the creative freedom approach to heritage. If a building collapses, you start and then you restore it per the new materials, even though you don't change it. So you go to France now, and the Notre Dame Cathedral, which caught fire last 2 years, they are restoring it, but they have the minimalist approach where they would use current materials, but they would restore it to suit the old functions, and that is the approach the French used. And this was counteracted by John Raskins in 1819, who says that that approach do not respect the toil of their forefathers. They did something, and within that generation, they upheld it very high, and there is no need to destroy everything. So, to Raskins' approach, you need to leave it as found. So, if it's about the material, research into it, get the similar material and place it there. So these are the two main approaches. And in 2012, we had a tool which is being used to run either of these approaches. You can use any approach as a country or as an architect and engineer if you are found to restore any building. And this tool is the Heritage Impact Assessment Tool, which the UNESCO is using it in its historic urban landscape, and then adaptive reuse. There are some buildings you don't demolish everything, but you change only the inside. So these are some of the two main. These are the two main approaches that we have in preservation and management. And as I said, in 2012, the World Heritage Institute of Training and Research for Asia and the Pacific region came up with the Heritage Impact Assessment as a tool. Just as in 2015, Ghana had environmental impact assessment. So for certain group of buildings, you need to tell us how you are going to handle the environment. Now, this is the new trend in heritage management. If somebody buys a building and it's old, the person should not necessarily leave the building as it is. Because somebody will say, well, why should we leave an old building in the city currently? It's not necessarily to leave the entire building there, but the impact assessment report that is conducted by the designer would inform the authority. It could be a whole wall. For instance, you get to Stamford Bridge, that's a typical example in the UK, the Chelsea Sports Stadium. They left a whole wall of the old stadium, which is signifying the construction technology which used to be there at the time of constructing that stadium. And that wall houses the Hall of Fame of Chelsea. So everybody who visits there, you can't go without taking a photograph along that wall. So the old building is demolished, but there is something which is telling posterity that something was there. So this tool is actually to give us a response to what we are doing with the old buildings. In literature, we find a lot of Ghanaian researchers, Boche, Adapa, Kobla, and Amwako, all calling on the town and country planning to ensure effective planning of our cities. And heritage cannot be taken out of it, because it's also very important, as Sadowski 2018 claims here, that we can never ignore cultural and then architectural heritage in the development of any city. In Ghana, heritage preservation actually started in 1937 when the colonial masters brought in a curator in Achimota College called Tezansor. He led the country into the formation of Monuments and Relics Commission, and this was followed by Brandt, who was also part of the heritage preservation group, and he actually worked along 4 Anglophone countries along the West African coast, and then he formed the national museums. And then Lawrence also came in 1951, who was also moved on the 2 into ancient monuments and then historic buildings division. And their works culminated into a statutory body which is empowered by NLCD 1996, NLCD 387, which is actually establishing the Ghana Museum as a statutory body which has a function of setting up comprehensive national register of all cultural heritage, implementing programs on listed buildings, which we have yet to have. We still don't have a national list of heritage assets as a country, though we can find some pockets of it which is owned by private individuals, but it's not in a national list, but that is part of their mandate, and then preservation and rehabilitation programs in the country. Looking at the policies and regulations from 1995 to 2013, most of the policies we had on preservation and management of architectural heritage was not seen. Most of them had to do with festivals, ceremonies, traditions, and then our way of life. Sometimes clothes, how we wear clothes and all that, cooking our food. But in terms of policies, we don't really have architectural heritage featuring in any of our documents. It's only found in these 3 documents: the 1969 Constitution, that's the National Liberation Council decree, and then the 1972 Executive Instrument, which sought to preserve the fort and castles, and then the 1992 Constitution, in which we are now, in Article 39(4), which states that there is the need to preserve our historic interest and then artifacts. So looking again into other documents, trying to find the correlation, because we don't really see to get the functions of Ghana museums felt within our built environment. It's only the town and country planning which is mandated to give permits, grant permits for demolishing and then developing new buildings. So I decided to go into the Local Government Act 462, and then the Local Governance Act, and all these acts set up the District Planning Authority, which is the committee which sits for permit granting and all development within every district or metropolitan assembly. and they use the Ghana National Building Regulations LI 1630, which is what they are using currently. So I looked into the LI 1630 to see if there is any aspect to talking about preserving our architectural heritage, but it's only under Part 17, which talks about the preservation of natural heritage, which includes attractive scenes, beautiful landscape, trees, wildlife, river bodies, which is even being destroyed currently. We don't see any river within our cities. That is not where I'll be going for now. Again, looking at the functions of the District Planning Authority in the Land Use and Special Planning Act 2016, they are supposed to ensure a total control of the development within our cities. And they have a 17-member panel which sits for all these functions. And again, there is a new development in Development Permit Guidelines 2015, which brought about the need to go for fire permit in some buildings, the need to go to EPA to obtain your report before the District Planning Authority grants you permit. So these are statutory certified reports which this document seeks to bring out, and currently we see most of our buildings being questioned about some of these documents. If you don't have it, you are not giving the permit to operate. So in conclusion, the study brings to fore a legal framework of the Heritage Impact Assessment, the functions of Ghana Museums and Monuments Board, and then the District Planning Authority. And there is a clear disconnect. The Ghana Museums and Monuments Board, which has been given the executive instrument and empowerment to ensure that historic buildings are preserved, are not part of the District Planning Authority Committee. So their reactions are always aftermath. They hear about the demolition of the judges' residence in Accra to make way for the new National Cathedral, and they'll go in, oh, why did you demolish all the apartments? These are historic buildings. You should have left at least one. But all of them are gone because they are not part of the committee granting permit for the demolition of those buildings. So they are always reacting after the incident has happened. So these are some of the functions, some of the findings and the conclusions made. One notable amongst them is the available policies and legislation do not seem to be coherent, as the Act 962/2016, which establishes the planning authority to grant demolition and development permits at various MMDs, do not consider a member from GMMMD. So it's always skewed towards just development and then demolition. So if we don't take care, these things will go on, and by the time we realize all our historic buildings are gone. So this study is recommended that the demolition of architectural heritage properties calls for a collaboration between the two bodies, GMMB and then the MMDs, through a request to call for a heritage impact report, which would inform the authority that this is how I'm dealing with heritage. This building has a lot of, you go to a Joso and Yas Antoine's building is demolished. If we have a portion there, this is how I'm dealing with it, so that the future will see that this is what used to be there. And then that report is very important currently, and this is one of the recommendations for this study. And then there is the need that this HIA report should be submitted by prospective development on special projects as part of permit requirements, indicating how architectural heritage property will be preserved, either partial or whole. And then the Local Government Act, and then the Land Use and Special Planning Act, which is talking about development planning, and then the authority must be amended to include representatives from the Ghana Museums and Monuments Board to ensure that on any sitting, somebody is there to ensure that we don't clear everything in our built environment. Thank you.
Architect Twumasi. This is a well-developed presentation. You can see that it's a very interesting topic. I believe we're all contributing towards the enrichment of this topic, which is being used as part of his PhD research. Now, I'll start with the opening or the comments and continue with the discussion from members. So, when we were talking on the problems, we talked about 3 key problems. What I didn't see, or maybe it's part of one of the problems, is the lack of appreciation, okay, of the value of our historical or cultural heritage. And how do we see community ownership playing part in the preservation of our cultural heritage? I was also looking at, do you have any idea during your literature review as to what has been the impact of colonialism on the way we see and value our cultural heritage? Because I know that when you go outside, most of this cultural heritage is based on the appreciation and the community ownership of these facilities and these buildings. But here, I believe, from my own perspective, the way colonialism brought about the degradation of our values has also had an impact on how we even see the things that we think are important. Unless it's being pointed out by a foreigner to us, that is when then we can actually appreciate it. So how do you see this comment, or how do you see this reaction impacting on your research? And then you're talking about the framework and the tools that you will use in these 2 main parameters with respect to the creative freedom and then the romantic restoration. What is your personal critique on any of them? And then is there a way to merge the 2 in order to create a harmonious form of tool which can be used for preservation? And how do you see technology in this preservation? Because I believe that as time goes on, there are things that maybe, because I believe it is difficult for you to preserve. So maybe you can use digitization or technology to store it either virtually whilst the thing is not even in place, but then you can also see it either in a museum or in a virtual library. These are
right. Thank you. In terms of technology and then using digitization, other countries have started. In fact, there was a PhD work done by one of the students trying to use digital technology to showcase what KNUST has, and that is well documented. We have a number of them, but it's always the Corbusier made a statement saying that it's always good to the taste of touch is much better, and then it relieves the person than seeing it in movies. In fact, you see some of our old cities in some movies. You will sit down, sit back, and oh, this is how Ghana used to be, the road to Kwadwo, and then you see how the area used to be. But it's not as good as you can touch it. That tells the real story. Currently, you go to the UK and then you are taken to the Buckingham Palace, you are the King George's house. Even you go to Menchia and you see in Menchia, you go to the museum and you see the relics of Prempeh I and others, and it makes you have a feel that the man really lived. And that is the reason why technology is good, but it's not the ultimate for any country. Again, my personal critiques on the 2 main approach is that my philosophy for this study is pragmatism. We cannot tow one main approach because it gets to a point the material will be very difficult to obtain. For instance, you go to Fort Presenstein in Keta and you find a 2-feet wall made of oyster shells, and it's as high as it's about twice this height. Very huge, and it's all built in oyster shells. Half of that fort was built in oyster shells, and it's so huge, a wall. And currently, you may not find the oyster shells available, so there will be the need to adapt another material, trying to merge the 2. So as a country, with our level, it will not be beneficial to decide on we are going only one line. We can merge the 2, but again, we don't change the values that is in it. Ghana tried to renovate our consular session in the UK. And immediately they wrote to us that building, you cannot touch the outside. You can do whatever you want to do, but it's a listed building and you cannot touch the outside. So we have to do the renovation within. And this is the stage we have to get to, where some buildings should not be touched to tell the story as the country is growing or as the city grows. The impact of colonialism, yes. In Ghana, we have a lot of perceptions about colonialism. Whether we like it or not, it's part of our landscape. In terms of architectural heritage, in terms of our history, it's become part of it. Even though colonialism tried to subdue our history, and it's time we bring it out. It's time we bring out the few that we can recollect. We can't throw it away and always use the modern architecture as ours. We have ours, and whether one or two, we should be able to preserve it and move on. But it's part of us. You go to the Ascent area and then you see the slave routes and how they were back and others. It's quite awful, but it's part of it. You can't take it out. The appreciation, as you mentioned, there is this theory of interestedness and disinterestedness, where you need to be interested in something to place that needed attachment to be able to preserve it. So it's up to us as a country. I moved with one of our drivers to see one Ashanti traditional building in Sawan, the Kenyan area. And the people around don't even realize they have something beautiful like that over there. We were standing around it and asking, yet they could not show us. So it's again boils down to awareness. If the person is aware, we call them civil experts. If the person is aware of his environment, he will have that attachment to it. As you find in Venice, you go there and the person will ask you, you're in Venice. I mean, the inhabitant will ask you, if you are a foreigner, have you seen this? But in Ghana, that attachment is quite low. So we are trying to raise awareness for people to appreciate what we have. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Brown.
I think that was a very interesting presentation. I think you captured everything nicely. I particularly liked your recommendations and your conclusions. And then, before I saw your conclusions, exactly what I was thinking about regarding the curator or the person from the museum. Yes. I have been in several planning committees, and not once did we ever have anyone from Ghana Museum coming as part of the committee. So I think that is a very important thing that you have to push if you can. And then just like what Chairman said, all the time you were talking, I was thinking that it all boils down to awareness and the importance of our heritage. We haven't gotten there. We don't see, we don't know how important it is. And your presentation, the earlier slides, you talked about the pre-colonial time and Otumfuo, grandparent and second building has been demolished. Let me tell you today that I went for a conference in Madagascar, and then from there I went to the Seychelles. And the Seychelles, the first place they took us to was the grandparent, the second residence where he was staying. The Seychelles, they are making a lot of money out of this. Yes, it has become a tourist attraction. And we don't see it. We don't see it. We don't see it. That was so sad. That was so sad. They make a lot of money from grandparent, the second, where there is a whole place, where it's a different, it's a whole compound, and they make a lot of money from people coming there to see. The same way, I was in Dubai. Yes. Those who have been there, you can Dubai is out of this world. They try and copy the Western design and then overcome. Oh yes. Dubai. Anyway. But in spite of all of this, they still have a section where the old Dubai is. So you can see how the place came out of just sand, and then those trees. Yes. That is, I mean, they want you to see where they have come from.
Yes.
So they haven't demolished everything, and that thing is very commendable. Very, very commendable. The same way, I was in Italy, and then in Turin. There was this picture which was painted about 500 years ago. And that picture depicted a whole street. Yeah. I'm telling you, when you go to that street today, the same. Nothing has changed. The buildings are just like how it was 500 years ago. The only difference is that the inside, of course, will be modernized. But the outside is the same. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. So, in fact, this is something that we need to really get in. We have to think about it and work hard at. Because it's happens to me when I see all these old buildings just being pulled down, and then just because we want to modernize, westernize, and then we come up with all these glass structures. So I think I'm happy with what you are doing. Don't let it end here. If you can push it further, it will serve the country very well. Thank you.
Okay. Heritage impact assessment. Let me make this premise for you to understand very well. I always say that I'm a student of sustainability impact assessment. So whenever I see it, it's like the cat seeing a mouse. I'm always ever ready to chase it. So when I saw the topic, heritage impact assessment, I was like, wow, this should be very interesting. What is it in heritage impact assessment? So it was good you caught our attention. But the point is, when we are talking of sustainable impact assessment, for example, if I take environment, we have indicators of environment. I will look at probably global warming potential, or let's say carbon emissions. So the key thing in this your presentation, which I was expecting, was your indicators. So what are the key indicators? But mind you, there are other things that you also have to consider. The fact that we have heritage impact assessment doesn't necessarily mean you can apply it here. So if you pick certain indicators, or you pick certain, let's say, software, for example, we have in SIR, we have Eco-Invent, we have the software created by BAF. I don't know the software which is coming from, but I think that if you are able to see out the indicators and then work with it, it is going to make your PhD and your work really, really stand out. That is one thing I want you to critically look at. Number two, in this presentation, from where I sit, I was two things were coming in mind. Now you gave us a very nice topic, but the content of what you presented is not in relation to your topic, in fact. Because in the content of what you were presenting, you were making us to look at laws. So I was asking myself, what is this heritage impact assessment and to blah 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 blah, and then you are coming to laws. So on one hand, you are teaching us to follow heritage impact assessment and on the other hand, you are talking of laws. So I was asking, why don't you reflect your objective to the topic that you want to keep? These are two key things I want you to critically look at, because the objective should have a direct bearing with your topic that you want to talk about. Thank you.
My point is just about the research methodology. You mentioned that you use a qualitative methodology, but in your presentation, I didn't see any qualitative methodology explained. What type of qualitative methodology did you use? Is it focus group? Is it interview? Or participant observation? So you have to make that one too clear so that we can follow the scientific merit of your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Qualitative methods, as you rightly said, yes, the focus group, the interviews, but looking at literature alone is also part of qualitative research methods. So looking into the laws and then the policies that we have brings out. And in this case, to be able to reach out to exactly where you want to go, I used descriptors. That's the keywords. in search engines to come up with all the documents that I found. And it's also considered under qualitative research methods. The study will follow up when the interviews, as you said, and then the focus group discussion when it gets to the policy impact aspect, which is part of the study. But the current one has to do with only the review of the existing statutes. And Dr. Mark, your comments are well noted. The comments are well noted. In fact, the indicators, as you said, is very important. Even though the impact assessment criteria has been set, it's still a study ongoing, and that aspect, if it's reasonable to add it to the current state, because it's quite broad. Currently, I'm looking at the state of architectural heritage and its preservation and management. So I'm trying to skew it to a certain area, and then the rest will be future research, and it's well noted in that. And like you said, the topic and the study itself, I was trying to bring out a notion that per our laws, if we can change our laws to reflect the existing situation in other countries, then it will be good for us to really pinpoint buildings and preserve it very well. That is why the topic was like that. But as you said, I will look at it and reframe it, because this is an ongoing work, and I'll present it elsewhere. So thanks a lot for your comment. And Doc, I really appreciate your comments. In fact, it's clear. It's clear. In Dubai, they have the well, the strings they use to fetch well water from the oasis. They are all there. But we are trying to copy them. But we are rather demolishing what we have, which is not a good way of doing things. Those that we are trying to copy have preserved theirs. So if you want to see the glass buildings, it's not to say break off everything. And that is the direction this study is trying to go. Thank you.
Okay. Very good work. I think it's an eye-opener for me. I have stayed 90% of my life here in Twumasi, but I didn't even know that the 1925 government was where to stay. I used to know that for at certain periods of the year we go there, to cordon off the place. But I never knew that now he's moved to a building opposite the railway. Yes. So this gives me history, and it's very important that we are able to preserve this and tell about it so that we know our history very well. On the recommendation, I think just getting a representative of the Ghana Museums and Monuments Board on the town now last part, non-use special, will not work, because I believe that it is laws and technology that will let people obey rules and not just the representative. Because if you have a big man who says we want to demolish this 1925 building, build up a 10-story, I'm telling you that that person himself will be influenced to let it be pulled down. So it is legislation that should drive this decision, so that if you are going to pull down such a building, you have to even get the law amended for you to be. And going through parliament and all this, you just decide that I won't do it. So the law, not the representation. It's good for somebody to be there to prompt them that you don't do this, but you have to go through the law. Then the self-function response to Dr. Terry, the qualitative. In fact, as I was telling you, I wanted to know, in 1920 we had 100 heritage sites. Now they've been demolished to say 50. So gradually we begin to see that the impact is becoming something that we should be alarmed of, so that we begin to protect what we have. The last one I want to talk about is the redevelopment of these sites are as a result of two things. Land use and spatial planning authorities begin to plan and remodel cities, our own cities. The concentric system of planning is what we are used to. So everything in Twumasi is concentrated. Whereas we can do the linear planning system where you have satellite planning zones, they also have its own. So you don't demolish that and press museum to build a 10-story block. Whilst you have land other way. But the challenge is how to merge our national planning authorities and their mandate, and that was the traditional authorities, because it is the chiefs who are selling the land. So they sell the land for residential purposes and stores. How do we merge this authority? Because all the places that we are citing, the land belongs to the state, and the state will decide where and what to put what. But when the chief has demarcated all the area, including the river bodies, then it becomes difficult to see who is really in charge. So these things will come out in the West, so that at the end of the day, when somebody takes it, you know that look, these are the ways to preserve the sites. If the chiefs are doing this without approval from the, they cannot even sell it.
Okay. Since you are still developing your work, I want to say that the explanation you gave to me regarding the qualitative methodology is unsatisfactory. It is literature review that you conducted. So perhaps you are now going to enter into proper data collection where you will use your qualitative approach. So because you are still developing, keep that in mind so that one day you will not be at the same question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Derry. As I said, it's well noted. We will add it to it. In fact, it's part of the process. So when we get there, we'll add the interviews and others, because we need to actually get to the authorities. I've already been to most of the study areas, discussed with the district engineers, and then the national culture within these areas, and we are still picking up information. Thank you very much. And Director, your points are well noted. In fact, there was a study by Van Dijk, a Dutch researcher in 1980, which brought out 50 heritage sites in Ghana. From my studies, we have only 23 left, including the old Igbo one, which was nearly gone. Some are in ruins. It's only the big castles, the Elmina, Christianborg, which are still a Cape Coast castle, which are in very good condition. The forts are tearing apart, and then the Ashanti traditional buildings are also quite neglected. And had it not been the spiritual aspect of those buildings, I guess they would have been gone by now. It's very well noted. It's part of the scheme anyway, but I did not bring it out today. And on the loss, it's well noted. Thank you.
What I would recommend is, during the data collection, because you are visiting the site, you can pick geographical coordinates of this site. Maybe you can use a simple handheld GPS. And this can be used to create a GIS, because if you have the location and you have attributes like properties of the site that you are visiting, it can easily be used to create a geographical database, which on the click of the mouse, you'll be able to know the current site, what is happening. You can easily update the database, so you can add it to your database.
Thanks a lot, very much. I've discussed with them already, and it's part of the work, so thanks a lot for the reminder. In fact, I nearly dropped it, but with this one. Yes. All right. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, we thank Dr. Twumasi for this wonderful presentation. If at the end of the presentation you have any other suggestions or comments, you can see him personally and then submit those suggestions to him or discuss with him. So we thank everyone, our director, our deputy director, and all of us who are here to support our colleagues. Thank you very much.